All right, well, my name is Megan O'Connor. I'm the head of strategic partnerships at Chegg Skills. I'm focused on what we do in adult learning and specifically skills education. And I'm thrilled to be here today with a group of incredible leaders. And we're going to be talking today about a Jack without trades, addressing the U.S. skilled worker shortage crisis. And there are some incredible leaders here, of which I could go on forever about, but I'm going to quickly introduce them each in the interest of time, and then we'll jump into some of the questions. So let's start with right here in the middle, we have Dara Warren. She's the president of Career Business at Penn Foster Education Group. As president of Career Business, her and her team are responsible for closing the loop between education and employment for learners across a portfolio of high school, career, and college programs. On the end there, we have Wyatt Smith, who is the founder and CEO of UpSmith, Inc. UpSmith is a technology venture with the mission to address the skilled worker crisis. Here in the center, we have Josh Slayton, who's the president of ECMC Education, which includes various skilled trades and allied health training initiatives, and ECMC Group Development, which it also includes their Education Impact Fund, which is focused on improving education access and outcome for students and workers. And last, we have Jarah Euston, who's the CEO and co-founder of WorkWhile, a worker-first marketplace that connects the best hourly workers with shifts that match their skills, their schedules, and location. Thank you guys all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get started. And I think that, the conversation around the skilled worker shortage crisis is one that's very topical right now and one everybody has read quite a bit in the news about. And you guys have been in this long before it was the cool thing to discuss. So I'm going to ask you a lot about your experiences in the past. But I think that, I'd like to start with this question for Dara, which is, with the majority of trade workers having just a high school diploma or even less, how do we provide workers with more than just the technical skills they need? How do we provide them with life, communication, finance, leadership, all those other things to prepare them for not just a successful career, but a successful life?
Great question. I think the role of any training provider is to make sure that you're looking holistically at the skills that are needed in order to perform on the job. And in particular, for a trades role, there's a small business aspect. If you are a single proprietor, you need to understand the business aspect. There's a customer service aspect. So we spend a lot of time helping people navigate through difficult customer situations. One of our simulations has a very irate homeowner yelling at her tradesperson, and we're walking them through how to behave and what to do and how to think about it. So we really think about it as sort of scaffolding from the foundation of you need these foundational skills around communications, teamwork, collaboration, and then you can layer the more technical skills on top of it. And I think that's really the best way to think about building that holistic professional.
I was on a panel earlier today and somebody reframed them from soft skills to human-focused skills, right? Like these are the things that AI can't replace and that are still important for people to be trained in because they will always be applicable to the workplace. And so Josh, I'd love your thoughts a little bit about like the importance of these, what I'm no longer going to call it soft skills.
Well, and we like to call them professional skills. We hear from employers a lot that it's as important or even sometimes more important than the technical skills that they come out with from our training programs. They're very comfortable taking a baseline technical, aptitude, but if they can't work, to your point, they can't work with customers, they can't work with their other employers, it's not going to work for them. So how do you show up on time? How do you engage with the workforce? How do you engage with your customers is hyper-critical. So we embed these skills within the actual training curriculum and programs. There's more we can do. We're continuing to learn about how we best do that, but it is hyper-critical for us, for our students to come out and our trainees to come out with this professional skill development.
Awesome. Well, this next question I would like to ask to Wyatt, and it's important for all learners to be successful and transition successfully into their roles on the career front, but is the role of the employer or is it the role of the skills program? Whose role is it, I guess, is what I'm asking, to make sure they're prepared for the workforce?
For ensuring success and transition?
Correct.
Yeah, it's a great question. So our company is very focused on combating the skilled labor crisis largely through driving employment. So we work with employers to identify big gaps in their workforce. We then work with training providers to ready people in fast, affordable, user-centered ways to be successful in that transition. And our general thought is that people learn best by doing, and so the objective should be to get them into the job as fast as is safely and in a quality standpoint feasible. So largely it's the context of the culture of the company a person comes into that I think drives success. And when you look at attrition data and really drill on why people tend to leave jobs, it's really true across the socioeconomic scale. It's relationship with your manager, the sense that you're doing meaningful work that has purpose and dignity. And so for companies that create a culture that really promotes those things, they're really successful. We see really good retention numbers there. Those that don't tend to struggle.
So as a follow-up to that, if we're saying that, it is the role of the employer to make sure that they make that successful transition, like what can companies like yourself be doing so that way the employer knows this is what I should do?
It's a good question. I'll give you the very honest answer, which is I think it's up to us to be very thoughtful about who we partner with and to choose very selectively companies that have great culture and that are investing in their talent and are creating meaningful high pay jobs that are commensurate with the value that is being created by the candidate in the job itself. And so I think you've seen a lot of companies reset expectations around like what the clearing price is on labor in many markets. And there are some who are still catching up, right? Because often there's this mindset that, we pay people $14 an hour for the starting position. That's just how it works here. And I think those are going to have a very difficult time competing.
I'd love to ask you, Jarah, with regards to the fact that all trades jobs are ever changing thanks to technology. And so how you do the job today is not how you will do that same job tomorrow. And so I'm curious how employers can evolve for the needs of their future workforce so that way they can continuously be learning the skills they need to do their same job in the present day.
Yeah, I think that with the advent of mobile phones, right, like that changes everything for especially the workforce that we serve, which is hourly workers. So 82 million Americans work hourly wage jobs. That's 58% of the U.S. labor force. That's the majority. It is not a small slice of the pie. It's the pie. And there's been very little tech investment for these types of workers, right? We have a lot of companies out there building amazing software for people like me and everybody on this panel who maybe works in an office right behind a desk. But for the deskless worker, there's been a real shortage of innovative technology. And I think we're just starting to see that come online. And I think having those tools in somebody's pocket on their phone is the first step to allowing people to learn more and get more familiar with technology. Because if I'm using my app to clock in, clock out, coordinate, chat with my coworkers, my manager, it's not so much of a leap to then be able to enter in order information into like a warehouse management system, right? So we are seeing some beginnings of development there to introduce more technology to these important workers.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about access now. And something that we talked about before when we did our pre-call was the fact that less than 10% of women and less than 7% of Black people make up the trades workforce. How can we present training to increase adoption while also working with business owners to support these folks and these careers? And in a conversation I had earlier today, also the conversation shifted to immigrants as well. What can we be doing to provide access to them? Go ahead, Dara, you want to start?
I'll start, and I'll hand it over to you, Josh. So I think that the issue really is access and opportunity, right? Making sure that people understand that they can see themselves in this career and that they can model, they have someone to kind of follow and model. What Penn Foster focuses on is activating non-traditional populations. So people that aren't just through a regular flow, like where do we find some of these non-traditional populations, whether they be in community-based organizations, workforce boards, within employers. One of the programs that we've done in the trades is with Disney, and actually we've had a huge adoption among female workers going into electrician programs. And so that's a perfect example of they had opportunity to go into this trade and probably wouldn't have done it on their own, because traditionally we do see that 70 to 80% of the trade professionals are male identified. So I think one of the things that we can all do as training providers, as employers, is to create access and opportunity for different populations to move in and to give them partnerships, mentor programs, role models to follow as they transition from sort of trainee into employer.
Yeah, I think that's, the highlighting the access is really important. But even working further down, it's highlighting the pathway, right? And ensuring that people really understand that these are good pathways to good jobs. You know, the 4-year schools have won the marketing war over the last 30 years, right? But ultimately that only works, and it's great, right? It works for everybody up on this podium, but that works for 25% of our population at the end of the day. So, you know, it's destigmatizing that there's alternative pathways to really good jobs and really good careers, and it's not just the first job, right? It's the first job along a certain pathway that could lead to owning your own business or whatever it may be. And we've done a lot of really interesting work around kind of Gen Z and how that's, you know, their mindsets have shifted even during COVID, and where they're really starting to see that. I mean, between the student loan crisis and obviously the employment issues that we've had, that there are better ways for them to access their own best pathway. It's not just the pathway that's been highlighted by, you know, I think even pushed throughout high schools forever.
Yeah. So, you know, the too long don't read synopsis here is it's a PR problem, right? And
a little
so
bit.
We
yeah.
need to be having, you know, better communication with a larger group of individuals around the value of this type of education and then this type of career. And, you know, a follow-up question I have for you guys is like, how can we be using employment data and what could organizations even like your own be doing in order to help more and more people understand like this is a very plausible and successful future for them?
I think there's a seeing is believing element to this and show don't tell. So one thing that we're trialing is a partnership with Adept ID to pull aggregated wage data for different geographies around the country and be able to show in your market right now, this is the clearing price on a career as an electrician or as an HVAC technician, as a way of helping to drive the attractiveness part of the attractive, accessible, affordable path. And then the next piece I think is to then find trust-based networks to help tell the story in a way that like really is motivating. And so we'll be launching Memphis, Tennessee in 2 days. Follow along as we do it. And I was on the phone this morning with the head of the Memphis Christian Pastors Network, and they're going to be a partner for us to help to drive candidate outreach. Because ultimately, I think it's not just like what you're saying, but who is saying it that matters from a trust standpoint.
Great point.
Just one thing I'd like to say, Megan, because it connects this topic with the one we had before. Employment has to be part of the upfront conversation with training, right? So the learners and the future workers want to see what the job is, what the profile of the company is, what the wage is, what the path is. You have to bring that way up front into the learning training process. It's no longer, it's not the traditional go to school and then job happens at the end when you're 80% of the way there. We have to be having conversations about the job actually before they're recruited, which, you know, I think Wyatt is very similar to your model, and Josh is what you've mentioned.
And it's not just the conversations, it's that connectivity to the industry, to the employer, so they can both visualize and actually see and test and understand what that pathway is and what that work experience is like, so they can find out if that will make sense for them.
Yeah.
WorkWhile's in an interesting position because we're a labor marketplace and we're sitting right in between the workers and the employers. We have customers who need forklift operators. We do not have enough forklift operators. What we're able to do is show people, hey, there's this job that pays you $1 more an hour, but it's grayed out, right? You can't opt into it. You're not eligible for this. You need to go and get this training. And if you tell someone who's engaging in a mobile app or is savvy with technology that you need to stop work, you need to go find a course, go sign up at your local community college, like you've lost that user, right? Like it needs to be right there. It needs to be snackable content. They need to be able to digest it. They need to be able to complete it. And as soon as they complete it, they need to be able to opt into that job that pays $1 more an hour. Really condensing that funnel and trying to eliminate breakage at every step, from like becoming aware that this job exists to figuring out how I'm going to get trained for that to then immediately being able to accept it, we find is really critical, because otherwise you'll just lose folks. Folks are busy. They have families. Schools are closing. People are sick, right? There's a lot going on in people's life, and so you need to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that you're talking a lot about getting rid of, you know, any type of excess in terms of getting people into these trades programs. And then with regards to exiting these programs and getting into the workforce, you know, what are things we can be doing to eliminate that friction? So that way, those people who go through a trades program are immediately eligible candidates for the jobs they're now qualified for.
It helps to give them a job before they start. So we believe really strongly that employer demand is what de-risks this model. And so by starting with an employer who has a huge need they need to fill, and then starting with that job so that when you're in an upskilling program, you're already earning, and this is the first chapter of your career with this employer, is really important. Accepting for a second that there's alternative pathways that would have the job come later, I think it's just really important to be thinking about the fact that you're solving a customer problem that is real and growing, and narrowing and tailoring to that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things, just building off what you said, it's transparency around skills and what is needed for that job. The forklift operator, the job that was opening, someone that may look at that job, they may have 80, 90% of what is required. So how do you break down kind of our training into more competency-based learning? So they just need to train on that final 10%, right? So they can get a job. So it's speed to job, it's speed to training, and it's really focused around the skill sets necessary for those jobs that are open.
I'd love to get a little more tactical about exactly that, because I think you're totally right. Like, people need to understand if they already possess the transferable skills, or if they have 80% of the transferable skills, they need to enter into the next step of their trade career. So the question is, like, how do we actually do that? Is this a third-party provider that should be doing this? Should each one of your programs be doing this? Like, how can we literally help people who already have these skills understand that they can use them to make their career move?
I think it needs to be a third party or a partner, right? Because the odds of each individual business being really good at assessing this is pretty low, right? It's not their core competency. And so having a trusted partner that can funnel this talent to you, I think, is really critical, and making sure that you can make those assessments as easily as possible. It's just really challenging for the average employer to be able to do all of this themselves when they're like panicking about hiring and retention and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I would love to say there's a perfect skills taxonomy that we could all just tap into and use and buy and build off of.
Would love that.
It just doesn't really exist. And so what we are trying to do is to build our own taxonomy based on labor market data that shows us what those real skills are. At the end of the day, the job title is just not enough information to really know and how to train for that. So as a training provider, we always have to go beyond the job title, because an electrician has 20 skills that they need to build up to. So we have a bit of a head start in terms of what those skills are, but mapping them to the individual employer jobs and needs is something that we all need to do. And then also making that visible to the learner as they progress, right? So I think a lot of it comes to scaffolding, like you talked about earlier, with the foundational skills and then adding the more technical skills. But there's no perfect taxonomy out there, particularly for the range of jobs that we're all training for. But training providers need to use that taxonomy to really transfer the content to the employment.
Yeah, I specialize more in digital economy jobs, and we're always talking about, like, how can we redefine the syllabus so it's really tactical in terms of, with this module, you will get this skill, and that skill is an input for this job. And so totally agree with you that we need to be very explicit on what those things are. All right, so something that's come up a little bit is about the complex lives, right, that we all live, but especially the populations that everybody here is serving. And we've talked about how mobile is a good solution for making sure that we're reaching people with content in the way that they can probably best absorb it. I guess the question is, like, what else? We know from research that nearly 30% value a flexible, self-paced course. And I guess the question is, like, how do we continuously stay flexible and accommodate this learner where they're at?
You talked about the flexible course. I think the content's just a piece of it, right? And I think it's really important, but you have to have support around that content. I think a lot of, especially if you're serving underserved students, right, they don't have support systems. So there is training support, there's mentorship, there is access to different stuff like emergency financial aid that all kind of fit this surrounding ecosystem of supporting different learners. And really understanding what that learner needs. Because every learner's different. They all have their own situation. They step out of the classroom, they go home, and they may not have broadband, right? So it's really understanding the needs of the specific learners and having ways for them to tap into different solutions that can really support them to pull them through a program.
Yeah, I would say it's a big data opportunity and data challenge, right? So what is the data that we're capturing on the individual? Like, what are their preferences? What are their behaviors? What are their blockers? How are they doing academically? How are they doing motivationally? And I think building a kind of robust data model that allows you to understand where someone is at. Are you happy, sad today? Are you thumbs up, thumbs down? And then being able to point the right services to them. Because to your point, I think there are so many services that these learners need, but you need to help put the right service in front of them at the right time in order to, help them through that next challenge.
And proactively.
Proactively.
Yeah, it can't
yes.
be 2
this,
weeks
right?
after. You need this yesterday,
Yeah.
right? So we need to, it's real-time data, and it's real-time assessment of students for what they need, and the ability to kind of just point them in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a lot of technical challenges too, because you think about, it's got to be mobile, right? A lot of our workers don't have laptops, right? Or they're borrowing their kid's laptop that the school gave them. And is that content going to render on a really old Android phone, right? With a cracked screen, right? You really have to put yourself in the learner's shoes to make sure that you are meeting them where they're at, and making it easy, right? It has to be delightful. Right? If I'm going to try to log on to this thing and it's just really frustrating, clunky experience, I'm going to churn out again. There's so many opportunities for someone to say, you know what, I'm not going to do this training. I'm just going to log on to DoorDash and do some deliveries and make some money that way. Right? That's what you're competing with. You're competing with the opportunity to earn money from any of these other apps, right? Like, why would I invest my time in this? So that payout has to be there and the experience has to be decent.
May I add that I think that user experience matters a ton, and designing for user experience in a thoughtful way is really important. I also think that sometimes there's a bias towards length of time in program as a proxy for quality, which is certainly not the case in many situations. And so acknowledging that people are really trying to equip in a set of skills to then unlock a career opportunity, and then empowering them to move as quickly as is safely and from a quality standpoint possible is key. And so faster cycle training that allows them to be enjoying the benefits of having upskilled is important.
Yeah, I think stackable, anything that can do to modularize it is very important there. So to shift the conversation just slightly, there's many trades that your programs and your partners educate learners in that are critically important for the future of our country. And, honestly, in many ways, you could say the backbone. And so construction, for example, is a great one. Is there a way for us to be thinking through how we can incentivize stakeholders to invest in skills-based education to address, the labor shortage specifically and, some of the areas we're feeling this hurt the most on a national scale?
So is the question more about how can sort of government, federal funded programs get into the game?
Yeah.
Well, I think historically, the federal government, the state governments have really put the effort behind apprenticeship programs, right? And so that's sort of the infrastructure that has traditionally existed. And CTE programs, there's organizations or NGOs like the Job Corps, Youth Build, et cetera. I think the challenge is I don't know that we can rely on the kind of federal government alone to solve this challenge. Like, who actually is feeling the most pain? It's the employers, right? So the employers have to have skin in the game here because they're the ones that are feeling kind of the most pain. And I'm not sure that a public solution will be sort of the end-all be-all, but if you put a lot of private thinking around this, would that accelerate? Maybe.
Well, I think there are public solutions, right? And there's a lot of public funding that's out there. It's incredibly bureaucratic and it's incredibly hard to tap into. The registered apprenticeship programs, if you are a registered apprenticeship program, it's great, right? You have access to funding, you have access to, kind of connections through WIOA. WIOA is very disjointed, it's very local, and so it's hard to scale these programs. So the more they can do to create kind of commonality around how to, pull some red tape off them, right? At the end of the day, you're trying to meet the employer's needs. And so to allow employers to tap into that and access all this funding that's out there, and move away, there used to be IRAP programs, right? Industry recognized apprenticeship programs that was the goal, right? Is kind of trying to make them a little faster, a little more easy to access. And I think that's what you have to do from a policy standpoint. Short-term Pell we've talked about, that there are dollars out there. They're hard. They're hard to tap into. They're hard to access. And the more we can ease that, then we can kind of ease that flow into programs.
I've lost years of my life trying to figure out WIOA. There's a lot of money there. It's just not going, to the right place always.
Yeah, very true. Well, something we talked about when we met prior to this is that there's this perception that service roles are high churn. But what we actually know from data is that 70% of service workers say that they actually would want to stay within their careers and stay with their employer. they just want opportunity. And so what do we think employers in the service industry specifically could be doing to utilize their already skilled employees?
From our data, what we know, and we just finished our second annual survey and asked 600 hourly workers, like, what are you looking for in a job? Like, what do you want? Number one, guess, pay, right? It has to be a market clearing living wage. That's what people are looking for. But the second thing is flexibility. Right? They need to be able to somehow set their own schedules or at least have the time to take care of whatever life is throwing at them. As office workers, we take it for granted I can just pop out to the dentist in the afternoon. If you have an hourly job, you're given your schedule, and that's your schedule. You can't change it, right? There's no flexibility there. That's not working for people, especially after the pandemic. The genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back into the bottle. People are demanding the flexibility. We also found that opportunity for advancement and learning new skills were two really big drivers, and those are two separate and distinct things, because I think back to the previous discussion, it's not always clear that they're linked. Right? That in order to advance, I need to learn new skills, or that learning new skills is going to create advancement. It's not very clear in everybody's mind that those two things go hand in hand. And so we know that that's what people are really hungry for. And back to who's going to fund it, I think employers have a huge opportunity. Right? They're the ones who are going to be benefiting it. They should figure out a way to make it pencil to provide it.
Well, and I think you talked about the opportunity for advance. It's that transparency around it, right? So here's, level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on for whatever employer it is. We've done a lot of work with, National HVAC company that they've created that kind of pyramid for their employees, and it's very visible what you need to do and kind of how you advance and then how you earn more money, moving from level 3 to level 4. And creating kind of a training program, and we've helped create a training program around that for them, so their technicians can advance. And it's easy access to that training. It's visibility and transparency around that training, and then it's understanding the outcomes. And it works for the employer because, frankly, they can charge more. Right? They have a higher skilled technician, they can charge more, so they understand that ROI to them, which at the end of the day, that has to be part of the equation.
And I'd like to add, the study that Megan references is really interesting. So it talks about that 70% of people would stay if they had opportunities for moving ahead. It also talks about how there's a self-fulfilling prophecy where often employers will say, this is just a high churn type of job. And so then therefore they don't invest in those opportunities for those people, and then attrition happens. And so I think one of my takeaways from that is we have a company culture at UpSmith around believe in people, the notion that people rise to expectations and they're very malleable. And so if you create opportunities to reward them for being successful, people across the world will seek to do that. And our fundamental belief then is that, there is an opportunity if you create the pathway towards a better future that people are going to take it each time they can, which I think speaks to some of the stuff that Jarah is talking about that I think WorkWhile does really well about saying can we empower someone to have agency to pursue it.
And I'd just add, I think previously 401k retirement benefits were that was the table stakes for getting a job. And I think with the current environment that we are in, employer-sponsored education and training becomes table stakes. It's one of the biggest things that we see from our research that attracts people to these types of jobs, understanding that there will be a path, that there is education built into that career.
Okay, this next question is going to be a two-part question. I'm going to start by saying, the onset of the pandemic definitely brought early retirement for quite a few workers. And they, let's say baby boomers, and, it left understaffing in many places across the country, but oftentimes it provided the awareness that many adults who still have many years left in their workforce career were going to have to gain new skills. And so I think your programs, we talked about the fact that we need to be marketing in an effective way about why people should be taking these programs for career outcomes. But when you think about this specific segment, people who have already worked for almost 2/3, let's say, of their career, how are you attracting those individuals into your programs?
I think one of the things to think about is what are the sources of those demand and interests, right? So I think one of the primary ways that you would attract those types of individuals is by partnering with employers and looking within their employment base to begin with, right? So a lot of employers that we work with are doing multi-year planning that say this role is going to go away in 3, 4, 5 years. How do we take that population, reskill them and redeploy them into another path? So one of the obvious places is looking within the employers at their existing population. I think the second phase is is how do you target individuals? Like if someone is, 20 years into their career and is out of a job, like what are the options for them and how do you make it attractive? They have to want it if they're going on their own and looking for it. And I think, you also have to have the right surround sound supports for an individual at that to do career transitioning.
And I think a big piece of, you think about reskilling, people think of starting over, and you're not. And we talked about that. If you're mapping, the ability to assess skills and kind of understand what someone who's been in the workforce for 30 years or whatever, what skills they have, they could be very far along into transitioning to a new career, but they just don't know where to start, right? So you talked about kind of breaking down the skill taxonomy. There's a way we can do it where they can say, well, I can take everything I've done for the last 30 years and just by doing a little bit more, or just changing and doing this short-term reskilling, I can move into this type of new position. And it doesn't become as daunting then. You don't feel like you're starting over.
Are there any good examples of that? So like you brought up HVAC a moment ago, right? There's been so much change. There's been so much growth in that industry. They are continuously needing to do hiring and train individuals. Has there been a movement in that space where someone's effectively said, hey, this other dying workforce has, the majority of skills we're looking for in the HVAC industry. We just have to get them to, the end of their...
Yeah. Well, so there's an interesting anecdote about people that have had a career in mining and extractive industries who tend to be very safety conscious and have a mindset around being highly effective in sort of heavy fixed equipment type industries. And if you can create pathways of opportunity for those people to apply the same set of competencies that they have into this area that in many times is going to be able to comp them, not just on a base rate, but on an incentive comp basis for having driven consultative sales processes when you're building trust with someone at their home about buying a new air conditioning unit for $10,000, that's a pretty lucrative business to be in if you have high non-cognitive skills and you can build trust quickly. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there as you think about how to port that skill into a transferable opportunity.
I think one of the things is also looking at the commonality across the trades. Like if you look at a bunch of trades up against each other, to your point on safety, like there's some things are going to be across the board. Safety, math, blueprinting, those are going to be the types of skills that are kind of the foundation. So as training providers, we can all do a better job of sort of that intake and saying, you're 30% of the way through, here's your path to 70%. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say we've figured it out completely, but it's definitely where we're all should be headed.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting opportunity for some of the largest employers of like newer in-demand trade jobs to really be thinking about like where are some of the places that they could be recruiting from that meet up, 80%, 70%, what have you, of what they're looking for. So I think it's interesting to talk about the trades sometimes in distinction from digital economy skills programs because the go-to-market strategy is just so different, right? So you can imagine like a Chegg skills program, we train people in, let's say, cybersecurity is one of our programs. A lot of those roles are remote. These individuals can join our programs from wherever they are, and then we can help place them in roles that are available at their time of graduation, and we have, all 50 states to pick from. Most trades don't have that luxury, right? Locality is extraordinarily important. So when you think about, creating strong employer relationships, which are necessary for graduates to get jobs, how do you think about your go-to-market strategy in terms of acquiring learners? Because it's got to be close to where the end employers are.
So as a company that's doing this, yeah. Breaking news, Memphis, Tennessee. My previous role before starting this company was at Uber, and at Uber, we often thought about how to start the supply side of a marketplace on the basis of thinking about driving density, because as you drive density, your time to serve goes down, and that creates a better customer experience. So in a similar way, I think that if you can build density on the supply side, then it's really helpful for being able to be a better partner to employers and thinking through where the matching problem can be solved. And then I'll speak as a person in Texas that there's lots of opportunity in the South to be able to drive creative alternatives to a lot of these needs because there's openness about multiple pathways into credentialing. And so for those who may be in positions of influence in other parts of the country along the coast, I think being open to multiple ways of seeing people's readiness and also, frankly, like extending reciprocity and saying, here's someone who has built this skill and it's done in a really safe and high quality way. It could be applied here in California or in New York City or in Chicago. That's a way to help address the root of this problem. And I think can also solve some of the issues around how then we upskill people and help them be very successful.
The reality is, in fields that we're in together, right? So allied health, trades, hiring is very local, right? And so there's a set of skills that everyone needs to have, but the state, the community, there are specific requirements that you might need to fulfill. And I don't know that there's a perfect way around that, but I think that's what someone training for these roles really needs to be thinking about. Like, what is specifically needed in California versus Hawaii? Do we have the right tools and regulations? And then I think the other question is, like, what resources exist within those states and communities that training providers can tap into? Because we might not need to do everything. There could be organizations on the ground that can kind of take that last mile.
Great point.
Yeah, I think also there's opportunities for employers to look at where there is scale, right? You know, if I've got 100 distribution centers, well, everybody's going to need to know like these 10 things, right? Or these 10 skills. Because what you're able to do then, if you can get the cost of training down, you can then start to do some more innovative things like pay people to take it. So that's something that we're experimenting with. Because for me, if I'm able to train one more worker on forklift and I can connect them with a business that needs that forklift driver, that's more revenue to me. And then it just becomes a simple math calculation of how many jobs does that person need to work to pay me back for the money that I spent paying this person to be trained, right? So there's a lot more opportunities and a lot more ways you can be creative when you can bring the cost of that training down. And I think technology plays a big role, creating that more smaller steps, the more snackable bits, not having it be like a really long time of having each module be shorter, really drives the ability to do more experimental things, to get more people to take those trainings. Because, you know, to Wyatt's point, the average turnover in warehousing is like more than 150%, right? You're rehiring your entire staff like 3 times a year at that point, right? So why would you, as a branch manager or a warehouse supervisor, invest in someone if you think they're only going to last 3 to 6 months? Well, number one, you wouldn't today because that training is viewed as really expensive. But what if the training was cheaper? Would you give it a shot? And then would you see if that thesis is proved out that the folks are retained?
When it's allowing them to see the ROI of that training, right? We've had the same conversation with HVAC companies or everything. It's, you know, well, why would we train 10 employees when 7 of them are going to leave in the next 2 years, right? And the answer is because if 2 stay, even for 6 months, you've paid yourself back, right? And it's understanding that ROI of the worker. Like, you hate to get down to kind of the nuts and bolts of it, but it matters. Yeah. And so they just need to understand what that investment leads to and why, even with turnover, it still makes sense to do.
So earlier I moderated a panel on education as a benefit and how employers offer, education benefits and they encourage their employees to learn skills and with those skills advance their economic mobility. There's some companies like Amazon who have programs called, Amazon Career Choice, and the goal is to help people transition out of Amazon. All right, so now I'm going to learn a skill and I'm going to find a new career external to Amazon. And trades typically come up as a valuable program that they would pay for their employees to do. Nursing is one of them. Truck driving is one of them. If you guys were to say to all the employers out there providing these programs, like what additional trades would you want them to include in their approved list of programs they could take?
Well, I would start by saying if anyone in the room works at Amazon and is interested in skills-based training, we'd love to talk. And so I think to building your point, like there's all sorts of opportunities that are out there that I think also drives a very positive and virtuous cycle for companies who are investing in education benefits to build that skill, because I think it also is driving a very positive sense of goodwill for those firms and those that have built really strong marketing campaigns around them. I think it's addressing a real opportunity and need. I think that certainly we haven't talked as much about healthcare in this conversation, and skilled nursing is such a massive opportunity and will serve so many Americans as our population continues aging. 15,000 people become Medicare eligible every day, and thinking through how we're building the workforce to serve home health needs and other needs in long-term skilled nursing facilities is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just quickly say fixers and builders, right? And so there's HVAC, auto repair, right? Every company that's doing home deliveries needs someone to fix the trucks and the trains that are helping them move along. And so I don't think it's a ton of new. It can always be new, right? Mm-hmm. So electrician becomes solar electrician or something to that extent. But electrician, HVAC, repair are huge and growing and will continue as new building happens and as other stuff gets outdated.
They never go away, right? I mean, there's 1.2 million HVAC technicians and electricians in this country, right? The turnover, I see Doug over there. He knows this probably as well as anybody. The turnover in the industry is incredible, and we're just not the supply-demand imbalance on an annual basis. It's just getting worse. So, yeah, are there other roles? But let's look at the ones where we have this massive need and find better ways, better solutions to connect the labor marketplace to training providers, to employers to fill those needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think healthcare, from my perspective, accepting the trades that we've been talking about today, is the obvious one. Nursing, home health aides, there's just such a need for it. And these jobs also have the challenge of they're also high turnover because they're tough. They are really hard, right? Like, you get burnt out, even if you have the most supportive employers. So what can we do to help with that? Not just the skill, but like the mental health, the emotional support to keep people in these careers for longer, I think is going to be critical.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about like what are the wraparound services that need to be added, not just during the training, but the ongoing job. So that way we can see an opportunity for people to continue their economic mobility through these new careers. Well, this was a great conversation. Thank you guys all very much. It's super appreciated. And thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.